Welcome into Mississippi State as the voice of college football. Andrew Miller here with a transfer portal update as we finally have an answer as to who won the Jordan Seaton sweepstakes. And unfortunately, it's not the Bulldogs. We'll break that down all here in this episode. I appreciate those of you who are tuning in. If you could leave us a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you are not already, and have those notifications turned on so you do know when we do go live and whenever we have new content coming out to the channel. Obviously doing a ton talking about the Bulldogs in the portal as they continue to fill out their roster for the 2026 season. Had a ton of great content on the channel. Definitely want to continue growing and want you guys to be there to check it all out. So be sure you're subscribed and have those notifications turned on. If you could tell all the Bulldog fans in your life about what we're doing here at Mississippi State and the Voice of College Football, we would certainly appreciate that. Jordan Seaton here on a Friday night officially is an LSU Tiger. The five-star transfer left tackle, the top-rated offensive lineman in the portal, former five-star coming out of high school and a five-star player since transfer from Colorado, a guy that was a two-year starter for the Buffs, was a lockdown left tackle, a future first-round pick, and one of the most coveted transfer prospects we have ever seen in college football when you consider his talent level and the position which he plays, which, as we've discussed many, many times, there is a scarcity of talent when it comes to offensive line, especially left tackle position in the transfer portal. Guys that are high-level players, truly high-level players, unless they're coming up from a small school where you're talking about a program that truly just doesn't have the funds to hold on to them, those guys don't hit the portal because the school that they're currently at makes sure that they pay up to keep them. So this was a rarity that something like this would happen. And Jordan Seaton entering the portal, it was always going to be a case of top programs being interested. You knew that from the start. But Mississippi State was in an interesting position because they had his former O-line coach on staff. Phil Loadholt was the offensive line coach for Colorado back in 2024. So obviously you had that relationship between Loadholt and Seaton, and that relationship was significant enough that Jordan Seaton took his first visit out of the portal to Mississippi State back a little over a week ago, back last Thursday. Took the visit to Starkville, apparently went really well, and by all indications, Mississippi State went all in. They did all they possibly could to lock him down there on the spot, but also understood this was a guy who was going to take his visits and work through his options, but made a good push and also made it clear that financially they were going to do what was necessary to be in the game for Jordan Seaton. This was not a case of, hey, we're just giving you a courtesy visit because we're being nice to Phil Loadholt. No, we're going to give you a reason to believe that you should come here, both in terms of getting to play for your old coach and what we can do and how we see you fitting into this team, but also we're going to pay you big money. You know, I think the initial asking price out of the portal for Seaton was reportedly about $2.5 million. A lot of people around Starkville were saying State was ready to go 4+ right off the bat just to make it happen. State was ready to spend big time to get Jordan Seaton. And throughout this process, it has been made very clear money is not why this did not ultimately happen. But, you know, from Mississippi State, he goes and takes a visit to Miami. Then he goes takes a visit to LSU, a visit that was supposed to end on a normal time frame, but ends up getting extended longer. Kiffin, the portal king himself, made a massive push to keep him there. And really, coming out of that, everyone felt as though he was going to be an LSU Tiger. In fact, there were a lot of reports essentially suggesting that he had committed. Maybe not publicly, but he had told at least Kiffin and the staff he was going to come be a Tiger. Now, I know that has been refuted. I don't know whose sources are right and wrong on that. I'm just going with what's been said. What we do know is he didn't sign leaving Baton Rouge. And he left LSU, goes back to Atlanta, which I guess was where he was. I don't think he's originally from Atlanta, but that was sort of home base for him. Had a visit scheduled for Oregon that he didn't take, but Oregon's coaches come out and see him. I know Kiffin went and saw him. I've heard State went and saw him as well. I'm sure Miami did the same thing. And really for the past week now, it has been this ticking clock of when's this going to happen. And again, coming out of the LSU visit, everyone expected him to be a Tiger. But in the past couple of days, it seemed all the momentum had faded for LSU. It felt like, yeah, obviously they're not going to be done with it, but it seemed like LSU did not have the stranglehold maybe they once did, that maybe Miami was getting back in the game, but specifically Oregon was the team that you were hearing a lot about, that he had been very interested in Oregon from the jump, that family members had been interested in Oregon from the jump, and also that financially Nike was going to be a big factor, and that there was idea of him being able to strike some sort of a deal with Nike, especially once he became a professional athlete a year from now, that Oregon was going to be very difficult to beat in this process. The team you were not hearing about was Mississippi State. National reporters just did not give the Bulldogs any sort of credit on this, despite those around the program staying consistent with the messaging that Mississippi State remains in conversation and Mississippi State remains trying to do all they can to make this happen. Now, look, State's coach is reaching out and trying to convince Jordan Seaton to come be a Bulldog. Does not mean Jordan Seaton was necessarily going to considering the Bulldogs. But I also do think that State was under more consideration than was being led on nationally. I don't think the Bulldogs were just a complete and total afterthought here. I do think State did everything in their power, both from the coaching staff, the collective. Zach Selman has been talked about being involved in the process here, and State trying to get everybody on board. We want this kid, both in terms of what it means for this team, but also what it would mean for the program and what it would represent for Mississippi State to win a recruiting battle like that in this day and age. State went all in, and I do think they were given real consideration. I don't think it was just a courtesy visit, and I don't think State completely became an afterthought once he left Starkville. But at the end of the day, it was always going to be an uphill battle for Mississippi State, because even if money is not going to be the reason why, it's not like those other schools can't offer big-time money as well. And with all those other programs, you've ultimately got more to offer in terms of being able to compete at the absolute highest level, both in terms of we're at a big-time brand, but we're also at a team that we feel can compete for championships. Oregon has been in the playoff now the last 2 seasons. Miami just played for the national championship game. Also, Miami, their coaching staff are probably the best offensive line coaches in the entire country. When you talk about Mario Cristobal, head coach, and then Alex Mirabal at offensive line coach. And then LSU, Lane Kiffin, everyone sees what he has accomplished at Ole Miss. And you see the pieces that have come into Baton Rouge. They've signed the top portal class in the country. They've got the number 1 quarterback. They've got the number 1 edge rusher. They've got a ton of awesome receivers and skill talent coming in, and other good defensive linemen. The last big thing for them was, can they go out and get an elite offensive lineman, which, as I said, had Jordan Seaton not been in the portal, they weren't going to get an elite offensive lineman. But with Jordan Seaton there, the portal king was going to go hunting. And despite, again, the last couple of days feeling like LSU maybe had fallen out of it, they get it done when it's all said and done. Jordan Seaton is an LSU Tiger, and he's going to now be projecting Sam Leavitt and be operating that LSU offense. And it's someone Mississippi State's going to have to see. State goes up against LSU, obviously, this season. Coming off their bye week, I believe that'll be the first game in October. The Bulldogs will go to Baton Rouge, so they'll get to see Jordan Seaton and Lane Kiffin head-to-head. And I've said it a couple times now, like, you cannot look at this as a situation and say that State didn't do all they could when it came to Jordan Seaton specifically. State went all in. State did everything they possibly could have to make this happen. It was always going to be an uphill battle, and any of the other three, even, don't even think about LSU. Beating Miami, beating Oregon was going to be tough. And at the end of the day, it's hard to beat the portal king. So State losing out on Seaton is not something individually that should be concerning. Now, big picture, as I'll get into later in the show, there are concerns. For real. We'll talk about that a bit later. But first, now we need to evaluate, well, where's Mississippi State at from an offensive line standpoint? Because you had put in a lot of eggs in the Jordan Seaton basket of being the guy. Not all of them. They obviously went out and got other players. And right away, this is why it is so significant that they did get Brandon Snee from UAB. That whatever they had said earlier in the process about, well, we're not feeling great about this guy from a size standpoint, they're not worried about it, that we're going to go and still make this, we're going to make this happen. And that was a significant win. A good left tackle for UAB, as I talked about in the recruiting update for Brandon Snee. I watched him go up against Tennessee in a very defensive line that had some good pass rushers. And while, yeah, there were a couple times he got beat, over the course of the game, he held his own. It's not like he was getting knocked back every single play and was just in duress and UAB was trying to scheme around him. No, he was able to hold his own. That's one game sample set. What does that look like over the course of an entire SEC season? You don't know. But he's a talented player that other SEC programs, notably Auburn and Oklahoma, were interested in. And he is someone that you would now say can step in. And I think most would expect him to be Mississippi State's starting left tackle for the 2026 season. At the very least, he is going to compete for that job. So you have brought somebody in who you feel can be a competent player at that position, or a serviceable option at the very least. Again, there's still some projection with that because you've only seen him go up against SEC teams once now. But I do think that's a good ad. I like that it's a guy that has continued to rise up throughout his career, starting at D2, then going to FCS, then ultimately at the American Conference, with a little brief couple months at Kansas State mixed in between now in the SEC. So that was a good pickup. I think you're probably good along the interior of the offensive line. I think Cannon Boone coming back at center was huge for this team. I think DJ Chester, look, he had a mixed up and down career at LSU. Even as a center, probably was not as strong of a player as has been led on at times. But I talked about it a lot. Matt Moscona and LSU have discussed that they think he would have been probably been best suited as a guard. And by getting Cannon Boone back, you can play him as a guard and see, can you maximize his potential now, playing him at a position like that probably best suits him from a frame and skill set standpoint. But he's an option at center as well. If the guy was starting, I've said this before, he started 13 games in the SEC at center, at least as a redshirt freshman. If he had been completely unplayable, Brian Kelly would not have left him out there. So you've got options there. LJ Perdome from Arkansas is a guy that there's been a lot of hype around as, hey, we think that there's a ton of talent, ton of potential for what he could be. A young player, not a lot of experience, but could be a good player. Blake Steen, who has gotten lost in the shuffle here. Obviously, we would expect that that's a guy who's probably going to start for State at right tackle next year. That he was going to be State starting right tackle for 2025 prior to his injury. But he's played guard in his career as well. So maybe you could move him to guard. I guess in theory, you could put him out at left tackle if you wanted to, but that's probably a right tackle, but you got some options there with him. Miles McVay as your transfer in from North Carolina, a guy that, again, got a lot of experience last year for UNC as both a left and a right tackle, someone that UNC felt was a promising player. He's going to have a chance to compete for one of those starting jobs and is probably being talked about most likely as your swing tackle right now, but he could start at one of those spots potentially. So you've got some decent options to work with. And that's before you talk about, could a young guy like a Tyler Miller or a Mario Nash, like, hey, they hit their potential early enough that we feel confident putting them on the field or at least getting them reps. Could a Saquon Miles, Jakeem Shumpert-Perkins, one of the JUCO guys, after taking a redshirt year, they're up to speed, ready to play, which we've seen State do that with, JUCO guys in the past. Martinez Rankin is the most notable example. Is you get this big-time portal tackle who wasn't ready to play year one, but year two stepped in and became a good left tackle for Mississippi State. Could it be the same way with a guy like Saquon Miles, who was, a top-rated portal tackle? So you've got some guys that you think you can piece this all together. Now, you are not fully settled. You don't have many proven options across the board there. Really, you've got two guys that you know who they are, frankly, between Boone and Chester. Know who they are within the SEC. Brandon Snee, we have a lot of tape on him as a player. We've seen what he can be. We haven't seen it in the SEC. Blake Steen has played a ton of college football, played a lot of power conference college football. We haven't seen it in the SEC. Perdome has not been a starter. McVay has not been a starter. So you have some question marks that remain. And I think ideally you would still like to add another experienced body to the room. The issue there is there's not many worthwhile options left. I was hyping up my guy Evan Malcor quite a bit, the kid from Northern Illinois, which I did miss because I talked about him in the last episode. He had already committed elsewhere, committed to Miami of Ohio, also in the MAC. The fact he landed at a MAC school, transferring from the MAC, probably tells you that my evaluation skills suck. So I guess maybe take what I say with a grain of salt if that's the case. But hey, I'm still a believer. And as we learned with Ole Miss and Clemson, tampering doesn't matter. So go get him, I would say. But joking aside, there's really one name of significance in the portal at offensive line left. It's a player that just recently hit, and that's Tommy Kinsler from Miami. 6'6", 340 tackle, Florida native, who I believe this was his redshirt sophomore season with the Canes, so should have a couple more years left. Was not a starter, and I don't believe he's got starting experience, but each of the past two seasons has played in 10-plus games. So he's gotten a lot of reps with Miami over the past couple of years. Was a high 3-star prospect coming out of high school who has played quite a bit. Again, not a starter, but has gotten to a lot of playing time. And look, I've mentioned earlier the Mario Cristobal, Alex Mirabal combination from Miami when it comes to offensive line play. I trust those guys to develop players. I would take a guy that has been coached by them. And I wouldn't necessarily take it as like, he was here a few years and was never going to get on the field. Clearly, they're putting him on the field in one way or another, even as a depth piece. He's looking for a place to start. And as you would imagine, teams are very interested. Right now, the 4 schools in the mix, 3 of them SEC programs, Auburn, Arkansas, Ole Miss, and Wisconsin as well up in the Big Ten, are all pushing hard. Can you find a way to get in the game? Clearly, if you got those programs after you, it's going to be a financial thing. But, hey, man, you have a bunch of money that's just now freed up since you're not going to be spending the $4 to $5 million that you were about to spend on Jordan Seaton if you could have made that happen. So you've got the money to spend. Are you willing to spend it on a player like this? I'll talk about here in a sec. Maybe they're not, based on what they've shown so far in the portal. But I think you would love to get somebody, and a guy that, again, has been a rotational player for a dominant offensive line for the national runner-up is not a guy that I would say you couldn't bring in and feel confident about his chances of competing for a starting job. So if you have an opportunity to get in the game there, I think you absolutely should. Now, the problem is elsewhere, there's not another option. And before recording this, I was going through and looking anyone on the offensive line and also looking, okay, what about guys who've hit the portal in the past few days, if at all possible, because those guys may not have ratings on them yet. There's just no one out there. There's still guys in the portal. There are bodies in the portal, but not guys that you're bringing in to compete in the SEC, simply. So what do you do now? Do you just roll with what you have? I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they added another offensive lineman at this point, but you're probably talking about, if you are taking somebody else, it is a true depth piece coming in to sit and develop. I know there is a former 4-star offensive line transfer, I'm blanking on his name, from Auburn, who was with the Tigers for 1 year and has since hit the portal. Do you bring that guy in and as another developmental offensive lineman in the room when you've already added a few of those guys in this group? But I guess in theory, it wouldn't hurt to bring another guy like that in, especially at this point. You're probably not getting a contributor, again, unless you could find a way to get into the Tommy Kinsler sweepstakes. And I would hope Mississippi State has been reaching out, despite their constant pursuit of Jordan Seaton, telling this guy, like, look, man, like we would love to be able to bring you in here. Is that a possibility? I don't know. Do you go to the other side of the ball with defensive line? That is the other place where there's been the question for Mississippi State is, from a D-line standpoint, you've added guys. You've added bodies to that room. You've not added a surefire impact player. Now, I know D'Alen Evans is someone that people are very excited about, the potential there, and still young, would have had a chance to maybe compete for a starting job this year at Texas A&M, but Tennessee was very interested there. That was a big recruiting win for Mississippi State. You feel he's somebody that can come in and be an impact player, but even he's not proven, and you don't have the proven guys across the board. And we talked about D-line being a place State needed to upgrade, especially at the Sam linebacker edge rush spot, or defensive end for that matter. Although I think if Will Whitson's your guy there, you're probably okay. Can you get a guy to play that Sam linebacker type role? And you haven't seen one of those yet. A lot of those guys don't exist in the portal right now. There is, one name, and Cameron Morgan, who's a transfer out of Baylor, another young player who I think saw action in 10 games this past year. Did not have much production, but a young guy, high ceiling, is a 4-star transfer, had committed to Virginia Tech and is now back in the portal. I don't know the situation there, what happened, but he was going to go play for James Franklin, and that's no longer going to be the case. And you really haven't heard much about him since. Is that a guy that you would go after? And he is a true kind of edge type. There's not a lot of the edge types, though. So do you go to another position? And there is a proven player who has hit the portal at defensive line, Hosea Wheeler from Indiana, who was a former all-conference player for Western Kentucky, went to the Hoosiers this year, made starts for them on defensive line. So this is a guy that played regularly, had 30-plus tackles. I think it was 4 tackles for loss. Was a contributor for a national championship team that had a fantastic defensive line. On the surface, it's like, yes, by all means, go get him. I think he's a defensive tackle interior player, but you would still, let's take it, let's do it. And that's a guy you would spend money on. You've got this money to spend. Well, go put it into him. Well, the problem there is, technically speaking, we don't know if he's going to be eligible next year. He has already been a fifth-year college football player. He played 1 year of JUCO ball, redshirted his first year at Western Kentucky, and then it's 2 years with the 2 years playing for Western Kentucky, 1 year at Indiana. So that's 5 years of college football. It's the JUCO ruling thing. Can he get granted another year? And I think NACO's put out the report of the date's going to be February 10th for him. So if that's a guy that you would pursue, you're not going to know if he's a possibility to bring in until February. So are you even adding him to your team until – is he not even going to enroll until over the summer? I don't know how that would all work at that point. Because, again, you don't know if this is a guy that you can actually bring on your roster. That's the only defensive lineman in the portal that is a true proven type talent with a lot of production throughout his career. These guys just aren't out there. So what you're talking about is like you've got this money to spend and you want to go and address the needs, but the needs are not there. And that's where I want to get to my last big point on this. And I kind of alluded to it earlier where the Jordan Seaton in of itself, you can't be frustrated about because Mississippi State went out and attempted to get a big-time player and went all in and showed that they were willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. And it just fell through. And you understand why State was not going to win that battle when it was all said and done. And you don't have shame in that. And frankly, it's encouraging that MSU had the money to get in the game. Obviously, you probably don't have a chance if for Phil Lodeholt and that personal connection, but you also don't have a chance if you don't immediately tell the guy, look, man, we're going to spend whatever you need. So the fact you had that money is encouraging. And from a financial standpoint, it's encouraging that we heard about that, spending upwards of $30 million on this roster and that you clearly were able to spend enough to hold on to the talent that you had on the roster with Kelly Jones, Isaac Smith, Anthony Evans, Fluff Bothwell, keeping all of those guys as Mississippi State Bulldogs. You obviously had to spend to do that, and they did successfully. That is a huge win for the coaching staff. So you were able to spend in some key spots. You had the money to get in the game with a truly elite player that if you didn't have the money, you wouldn't have been able to. And you also just from a fan base and from an athletic department standpoint, the fact that you're talking about being willing to spend close to $30 million to put together a football roster says a lot about where Mississippi State has gotten to as a program from a structural standpoint. That is all fine and well. That should all be encouraging. But the thing is, if you were all in on Seaton and willing to spend whatever you were going to spend on Seaton, it's very clear you still had quite a bit of cash to work with, right? If you were going to make that happen, you had to have the money to make it happen. So you hadn't already spent it elsewhere. So this money was set aside and available for that player. Now, I don't know if that's a case if this was money that just came in, that once this became a possibility, you made a couple more phone calls and were like, hey, man, we want to get this kid. Like, are you willing to pony up some more? Or is this a part of the pool between NIL and rev share that you already had set? This is what we're spending on this roster for this year. I would imagine it's probably that. It's probably you were willing to spend out of the pool you had. I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, well, then everything I'm about to say in a second becomes, whatever. But you had the money available. You didn't get it. Where's that money going to go? As I've already talked about, there's not players out there that are worth anywhere close to what Jordan Seaton was going to get. There's not multiple guys who are worth what Jordan Seaton was going to get. Let's say you are able to get into the game with Tommy Kinsler, and let's say you win that battle. Let's say we find out early Hosea Wheeler is going to be eligible as a defensive lineman, and you say, yeah, we're going to go get him, bring him in. Those are two really good additions. Those would both be additions that if you brought them in, everybody would be happy. And frankly, just about everybody would say, all right, we feel really good about this portal class. I guess you still wouldn't have technically gotten the true edge rush guy, but you can't complain with what they got. Guarantee you those two guys are not combined to be worth what you were going to pay to Jordan Seaton. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I would be stunned if those two combined to be worth what you were about to spend on Jordan Seaton. So there's money that's not going to get spent at this point, frankly. At least it appears to be the case. Unless something we just are not aware of. Or again, maybe they've spent more than we realized on the roster, and this was extra money that was coming in to make Seaton happen that was not necessarily going to be a part of the pool, and they're okay. It feels though like you're going to have gone without spending this money, which meant you had resources available to reload this roster, frankly, build this roster. They didn't get spent, didn't get used. And knowing where you are at as a football program, that is incredibly frustrating. That we would say, we had all this money set aside, and we're not even using it. We had the ability to upgrade this roster, and while, yes, they did, we could have done even more and didn't do it. That's a tough pill to swallow, and that's not something that I think fans can be okay with. And you can look at some of the other positions out there, because we talked about offensive line. And yeah, Jordan Seaton is the only offensive lineman worth $4+ million a year. Okay. Could you have not spent big on one of the other top linemen in the portal just to make it happen? And like, look, are the guys besides Seaton worth what they're asking for? No. Lance Hurd, one of the top guys in the portal, obviously goes to Kentucky. Transfers out of Tennessee. Was a starter for the Vols. Was a okay player for the Vols. But Tennessee really didn't see him as a left tackle. They would rather him play the other side of the line. Tennessee also was not going to be willing to pay the alleged $3 million asking price for him. They weren't not about to do that. Is Lance Hurd worth $3 million? No, he's not. He is not that type of a player. And I guess if you're talking about feeling him as a right tackle, then clearly you don't think he's a true blindside protector. I'm making a case here as why you wouldn't spend that money. He's been a decent starter, though, in the SEC. In the same offense that you run. Like, if Kentucky's willing to spend it, why are you not? And, I mean, there's other guys out there. I'm not going to run down the list, but you see some of the programs these guys have committed to, and it's like, how is Mississippi State not getting in the game for any of these players? Because let's be honest, they didn't get in the game for a lot of proven offensive linemen. There was really one in terms of a proven guy. And I'm using proven loosely here as in this is a guy that you had to go and win a big battle for, and that was DJ Chester. Like, State had to beat Alabama and South Carolina to land DJ Chester. Like, that was a NIL rev share win for Mississippi State to get him to be a Bulldog. But that's kind of the only one. And that's not to knock any of the other guys. Frankly, there probably was a level of winning for Snee. Because, again, Auburn and Oklahoma were interested. So I'm sure there was some of it. But I also feel like it wasn't anything close to what you would be spending for. I don't know if that guy's making $1 million. Maybe he is. Because maybe that's just the rate of a serviceable offensive tackle. But like, I think you could have addressed a need with a guy that you know is a quality starter. And like, you could have gone and tried to win a battle for one of those guys at the top of the position. Whether it be a Lance Hurd, a Jacarius Peak, a Marion Harris going from Arkansas to Oklahoma. Wilkin Formby, I don't even know if he was a true proven guy for Alabama, but I mean, it's a highly rated guy. Bryant Williams as a transfer from Louisiana going to Arkansas as a 4-star transfer. Like, you couldn't win that battle. Xavier Chaplin, Florida State's been a dumpster fire. Colt Dietrich from Sam Houston goes to Washington as a 4-star transfer. Like, you couldn't have gotten in the game with any of these guys. That's what's kind of frustrating. Like, how did that not happen? And then you talk about the defensive end. You had edge rushers come through, Harvey Dyson, Caleb Herring, very productive players, very high ceiling players who land at NC State and South Carolina respectively. And, with Herring, there was talk of a lot of big-time programs in the game, and, like, South Carolina wins that battle, which tells you they spent, right? And Harvey Dyson, I don't know if he had quite the same level of programs attracted, but still, it's a very productive player. Goes to NC State. Mississippi State couldn't outspend NC State. Well, the word there is Mississippi State did not feel those guys were worth their asking price. And specifically, Arnett feels so good about Amari Williams as being a potential superstar at that Sam linebacker spot that we're not going to spend on these guys when we don't really think they're worth it, when we have a guy that we're not even having to spend close to that on. We're making a we're banking on this potential as being the smarter move for us, and we're not going to spend money on guys that aren't worth it. We'll have that money available for something else, like a Jordan Seaton. Well, what happens when you don't get Jordan Seaton? The money didn't get spent. And yeah, you could say, well, those guys weren't worth it. Why would you spend that money? You could have at least gone and gotten guys who you have seen have gone and done it and been very productive players. Herring was doing it in the SEC. Like, I think that would have been absolutely worth it. I think this coaching staff kind of grossly miscalculated how to spend on the roster, because it looks like the guys who were worth what they were willing to spend at certain positions were in this tier above to where they just were not that interested in Mississippi State. And I'm not even fully putting Jordan Seaton in there, because I do think Jordan Seaton seriously considered the Bulldogs. But I think a lot of these other guys, as we talked about, the only reason Seaton was, besides money, the only reason Seaton was interested in Mississippi State is because you had a unique connection that you had for that one player. If Phil Lodeholt never coaches at Colorado, the Jordan Seaton sweepstakes, Mississippi State's never a part of that at all. And it was exclusively because of the money. Sorry, not because of the money, because of that connection, right? These other offensive linemen, though, who would have been the top dollar type guys, clearly were not that interested. Well, then the other guys who could have come in and been more serviceable players, the state just didn't want to pay it because we don't feel they're worth that. We're just going to we'll take these younger developmental guys and we'll work to coach those guys up. And like, yeah, maybe you hit on that, but like you're taking a risk. You don't have a proven offensive line, and you didn't get a bunch of proven additions. You know, defensively, as I talked about, like, you did not land a single defensive lineman in this portal class who has high-level production. They are all guys who you are taking off of potential. Defensive line / edge rusher. Because you didn't want to spend on the guys who were interested in coming to the program. Now, you can say that that's being fiscally responsible, and that, well, yeah, why would you spend money on guys who can't help you? Like, and look, that comes up a lot. Fan bases complain constantly. State fans have done it with Luke Kromenhoek. Like, you know, State, the number of people said is like 1 million. I don't know if he got 1 million or not, but let's just say he did. You spent $1 million on a quarterback who did nothing for you this year, other than, you know, did have to fill into the bowl game, which I guess that doesn't make it worth it, but you spent that money on a quarterback, and people are so ticked off over that. And it doesn't bother me because I understand why they had to go and get that guy and why it made sense to. But people are frustrated about that. Jason Jenkins, who Mississippi State's bringing in as one of their defensive ends, and a guy that I guess is going to be expected to contribute now. He was one of Florida State's top money players last year. Florida State spent big money to get Jason Jenkins from Tennessee out of the portal. And it did not work out for them whatsoever. They're ticked that they spent that money. That's a part of it now. There's guys you're going to spend money on that you're not going to hit on, and that makes it frustrating. So State clearly was weary to spend on some of these players that it's like, yeah, he's got some production. He probably could be a decent guy, but there's no guarantee he's a true stud. If we're going to spend, it's going to be for a true stud player. Well, the true studs State was not getting in the game with, outside of the very best stud of all, but that was because of a unique circumstance that lets you have a chance with him. The end result is you've gone without spending money. And if you want to say that that's being fiscally responsible, I think you can argue the opposite, because technically you didn't do what you could to maximize the roster for this year. You had money set aside to build a truly high-level roster, and you're going to go without using all of those resources. So I don't think that's maximizing. I also think about from a fan investment standpoint. Like, your fan base does not believe in you. Mississippi State fans do not believe in Jeff Lebby. They do not believe in this coaching staff. They do not believe in Mississippi State football as being a program that they can be excited about moving forward. Other than the shining hope of Kamario Taylor, that's the one thing you're holding on to. But for the program as a whole, there's not this excitement around it. Going out and getting players, even if you think they're not guaranteed to be studs, but guys who have torn it up that other SEC programs are interested in, that's a way to build excitement. And building that excitement, gets people to buy season tickets, gets them to want to come to games, and creates atmospheres to help you win football games, and then continues to help you bend this thing further and further and further. Like, it would not have been the worst thing for Mississippi State to spend some money on some guys that were not – spend more than a lot of guys were worth in this class. And again, I'm going to continue – I don't have the numbers in front of me. I don't have those connections to be told whether or not they're actually going without spending X number of dollars. I am drawing that conclusion off the fact that we've heard State had all this money to spend. We saw them go all in on a player at the end of the portal cycle and be rumored to spend a whole lot of money. They're now not spending that money. Where's the money going to go? You just roll it over to next year? Okay. Is there going to be a next year for this coaching staff? We'll see. And again, I've taken – this has become pretty negative here towards the end, but I'm just speaking realistically about the situation State's in. None of this is about Jordan Seaton specifically and being upset over losing Jordan Seaton. I don't think you should be upset if you're a State fan over losing Jordan Seaton within the vacuum of that. I think it's fair to be upset, though, over the idea that State kind of – people would get mad if I say they pushed all their chips in on Jordan Seaton, put all their eggs in that one basket, because it's not technically accurate. But in terms of going after a big fish and in terms of really spending – I guess outside of the guys that they wanted to hold on to on the roster, they went in on one guy. And they missed. And now you don't have the time to go and put that money elsewhere and really make this happen elsewhere. That's the part of this that's frustrating and a bit more concerning for Mississippi State. So, look, yeah, they could still add players. They might bring some guys in who end up being really good players for State this year. Like that could happen. But you've again created a situation where you haven't given anybody a sure thing. And there's no such thing as a sure thing in college football, especially not in the transfer portal. But by sure thing, I mean your fan base cannot point to the guys you've brought in at the biggest positions of need. Offensive line, defensive line. They cannot point to those spots and say they added ABC players with all of this production, and I'm confident those guys are coming in and bringing that production to Mississippi State. They've once again added guys off of potential. Maybe they hit, maybe they don't. We'll see. So, yeah, State loses out on the Jordan Seaton sweepstakes. Not a surprise, but it has put you in an interesting situation here as the portal is winding down. Who else are you going to be able to get? Where's that money getting spent? And what does it mean for the 2026 roster? Appreciate everybody who has tuned in. If you haven't already, please leave us a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and have the notifications turned on so you know when we go live, you know when we put updates like this on the channel. We'll obviously have more transfer portal news moving forward. As always, swing your sword and hail State.